I remember the exact moment everything shifted, the point when I realized I was trapped in a relentless cycle that wasn't just about money, but about how I was living my life. For years, I had been battling debts, juggling bills, and carrying that heavy cloud of frustration that felt like it was permanently settled over my shoulders. Every payment I made seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving me with less than I started. What haunted me most wasn't just the numbers in my bank account. It was the sinking sense of stagnation, as if no matter how hard I pushed, I was running in place. It's as if my efforts were met with invisible resistance. I chased quick fixes, hoping each decision would be the one to turn things around. I cut corners, skipped self-care, hustled longer hours, and yet, nothing changed. Instead of progress, I found myself facing the same fears and anxieties around money every single month. The pressure built until I felt nearly desperate, like I was drowning and grabbing at anything that might be an air bubble. But what struck me most was the exhausting feeling that this frantic energy was doing more harm than good. I was forcing my way through, trying to wring results out of a system that just wasn't responding to my panic. One day, sitting alone with a stack of overdue notices in front of me, I caught myself mid-thought. My mind was racing with worry, flipped through a mental checklist of what I could sell, who I could ask for help, how I could scrape together the next payment. But there was no plan, no vision. I was reacting to emergencies, patching holes, firefighting in constant motion. It was overwhelming, and suddenly, I realized something that no one before had said with this clarity. Money does not respond to desperation. It responds to something else, something deeper I had never understood before. This wasn't just about budgeting or cutting expenses. It was about the way I was showing up every single time I had to make a choice about money. In fact, the more I panicked, the more money slipped through my fingers. The veil lifted, revealing a pattern I had been blind to all along. My automatic reactions to money, fear, urgency, anxiety, were creating the very walls that kept financial stability out of reach. Every decision was an instinctive move to put out immediate fires, not to build something lasting or meaningful. I'd been spinning the wheels of survival mode without realizing that's exactly what kept me stuck. And that's where the Rael story begins. Because when I took a step back, away from the noise of bills and deadlines, I discovered I had been living in a financial fog, eyes closed, mind racing, heart tight. It was as if I was sleepwalking through my own money story, repeating a script that wasn't mine but had been passed down from experiences, fears, and beliefs buried deep beneath conscious thought. I started noticing how these hidden reactions weren't random. They were responses shaped by years of internal programming. That moment was uncomfortable but eye-opening. There was pain in realizing I'd been my own adversary, but also hope in knowing there was another way. It wasn't going to be about forcing better results or chasing quick fixes anymore. Instead, it invited a different approach, one where awareness of how I thought and felt about money became the fulcrum of change. Not by sheer willpower, but through understanding the unseen emotional currents driving my financial decisions. This journey wasn't easy. It felt like stepping off a well-worn path into the unknown. But it was the invitation my life needed. I began to see that when my mind shifts, when my relationship with money changes at a fundamental level, everything else begins to follow. The stress loosens, the panic subsides, and suddenly, opportunities that were invisible before come into view. It's not magic or luck, it's perception evolving, allowing me to choose actions with clarity and calm instead of chaos and fear. That shift rewrites the story of money in our lives. Instead of money slipping through our grasp, it starts to flow differently because we behave differently. As I share this with you, I want you to know that if you've ever felt stuck, frustrated, or overwhelmed by money, like I did, you're not alone. There's more to this experience than just dollars and cents. There's a deeper rhythm to uncover, a way to step out of reaction and into conscious creation. In this moment, I invite you to lean in and join me, to explore what it means to move beyond the cycle of struggle, and to discover how awareness can become your greatest tool. Because once we understand the true nature of our relationship with money, not superficial tricks, but the emotional core, we begin an extraordinary transformation, not just in our finances, but in how we live, think, and feel. This is the beginning of a new chapter one I'm excited to explore alongside you. When I first started paying attention to the way my mind processed financial decisions, I noticed an unexpected pattern. My thoughts darted like a relentless hummingbird, flitting from one worry to the next without pause. This rapid mental noise drowned out any chance to strategize or reflect calmly. I recall a moment sitting at my kitchen table, bills scattered before me, feeling as if I were trying to catch a swarm of wild bees barehanded, each aggressive buzz representing a new urgent concern I desperately tried to control. Yet, the harder I grasped, the more sting I received. That experience opened my eyes to something crucial. My mental state wasn't a neutral backdrop. It was an active participant shaping outcomes. It struck me how frequently, in times of stress, I engaged in what felt like mental multitasking gone awry, trying to simultaneously solve problems, recall deadlines, and suppress panic created a cognitive storm inside my head. Instead of crafting clear, deliberate solutions, I threw energy at immediate pressures, hoping sheer force would override complexity. This frantic juggling, however, only heightened my internal disarray and diminished my focus. As a result, I missed small but essential details, deadlines, opportunities for negotiation, or even basic steps to conserve resources. The nonstop churning in my brain demolished the chance for thoughtful decision-making. One afternoon, overwhelmed by the buzzing demands of urgent tasks, I took a moment outside, breathing deeply beneath the sprawling limbs of an old oak tree. The contrast between the chaos in my mind and the steady calm of nature was palpable. I realized that to change my behavior, I needed first to change how I occupied my mind in those defining moments. Instead of acting reflexively from a place of scarcity and alarm, I needed to cultivate a steadier presence, a mental environment where clarity, calm, and patience were the default companions. This insight prompted me to experiment with small acts of mental discipline. Instead of diving headfirst into the pile of worries on awakening, I began carving out just 5 minutes of quiet reflection. During these moments, I let go of racing thoughts and focused simply on observing how I felt, without judgment or immediate response. This practice was unfamiliar territory. My internal world had long been a spinning merry-go-round of stress. Yet, slowly, the scenes in my mind-room began to shift. I found new capacity to pause. In these brief windows, I noticed patterns previously invisible. My tendency to leap from one crisis to the next, the habitual negative forecasts my mind made, and the subtle but constant tension gripping my chest when I imagined future expenses. With this new awareness blooming, I confronted one of my most entrenched internal scripts, a voice, often faint but persistent, that whispered I had to act quickly or lose everything. This compulsion to move hurriedly, without time to assess or plan, was like a runaway train fueled by fear. I came to understand that this internal pressure wasn't an immutable fact of reality, but a mental construct I could question and reshape. Reframing this voice into a dialogue rather than a dictator, I began asking myself, what evidence supports this rush? What might happen if I slowed down for just a moment and evaluated the landscape before acting? To test this, I recalled a recent scenario where I impulsively paid a bill with my last available funds, leaving no buffer for weekend expenses. Instead of strategizing a temporary plan, I acted immediately out of panic. Reflecting with fresh perspective, I recognized alternative steps I could have taken, such as contacting the provider for a payment extension or reallocating other resources. This realization wasn't an exercise in self-criticism, but an invitation to treat my mind with kindness, valuing insight over haste. It became clear that this shift reverberated beyond individual choices. Cultivating mental presence became a form of emotional self-care, nurturing the internal conditions where thoughtful financial action could bloom. By learning to temper the impulse to react and instead create space for mindful evaluation, I found new ground to stand on. The metaphor that came to mind was tending a garden. Wild, hurried digging uprooted more than it healed, while patient, deliberate attention allowed seeds to take root gradually. This transformation grew from curiosity rather than willpower. Each time I resisted slipping into the whirlpool of panic, I celebrated a small victory, reinforcing a new neural pathway. Over time, as my inner environment settled, situational shocks that would have once triggered chaos were met with a calmer, clearer mindset. This didn't erase challenges, but it offered me the capacity to navigate them with greater poise. Now, consider how this applies when you face situations that ignite financial stress, a sudden unexpected bill, a job uncertainty, or a missed opportunity. Instead of plunging headlong into reactive decisions, what might it look like to intentionally create a moment of stillness? Could you listen deeply to your bodily sensations and inner dialogue before leaping into action? Could you practice asking precise questions to uncover options usually overshadowed by anxiety? For me, this process revealed a fundamental truth. The quality of my internal mental space directly impacted my capacity to generate constructive financial choices. When the mind is cluttered and reactive, it's as though trying to read a complex map in a dense fog. Missteps occur inevitably. But when the fog lifts and calm clarity prevails, the landscape is visible and pathways present themselves naturally. By embracing this new awareness, I shifted from being at the mercy of instinctual turmoil to becoming an active observer steering my decisions with intention. It was a turning point that transformed the pressure cooker of financial stress into a place of possibility and creative problem-solving. This inner transformation, though quiet and gradual, laid the foundation to approach money in a way that reflected not just survival, but thoughtful growth. In one of those quiet moments after a particularly draining week, I found myself staring at my reflection, not in a mirror but in the window pane, watching rain trace irregular paths down the glass. The rhythm outside contrasted sharply with the turmoil I'd been carrying inside, an endless loop of tension that seemed embedded in every financial choice. This time, rather than retreating into habitual panic or pushing past it, I decided to explore a different question. What stories was I telling myself when I faced monetary challenges? Digging into that mental narrative revealed powerful layers. These weren't simple facts or numbers. They were emotional tapestries woven from early experiences and subconscious messages. I recalled moments when I absorbed phrases like, "money doesn't grow on trees," or observed adults rushing, arguing, or giving up in financial stress. Somehow, these fragments had crystallized into internal scripts that cautioned me to tread carefully, to expect scarcity, and to distrust abundance. Instead of viewing finances as a neutral realm to navigate, my mind often framed money as a battleground where survival instincts dominated. Discovering how these internal stories shaped my reality felt like approaching a hidden control panel inside my mind. Each worry or limiting belief acted as a dial, influencing decisions far beyond what I initially understood. This shifted my perspective profoundly. It wasn't only about tracking expenses or earning more. It was also about identifying which mental scripts governed my choices, often silently steering me toward defeat. When I realized I could rewrite these scripts, I sensed a newfound agency begin to take root. One afternoon, I found myself negotiating a contract for freelance work. Normally, I might have accepted the first offer out of anxiety, fearing rejection or loss of opportunity. But armed with this fresh awareness, I paused. Instead of defaulting to old patterns of yielding or rushing decisions, I mentally rehearsed a more composed dialogue. I imagined calmly asserting my worth, setting boundaries, and clarifying terms. To my surprise, the conversation unfolded with unexpected ease, and I secured better terms than I anticipated, evidence that internal shifts could rewrite external outcomes. This experience unveiled another facet. Emotional regulation isn't merely a coping mechanism, it's a strategic advantage. When I checked in with my feelings and consciously sidestepped reactivity, I opened space for creative problem-solving and clearer negotiations. The old script, one of hurried stress, gave way to a new theme of measured evaluation and self-respect. I learned that emotional turbulence often narrows perception, turning complex scenarios into overwhelming threats, whereas calmness expands perspective, unveiling options previously hidden by anxiety. Further along this journey, I encountered an unexpected companion, curiosity. Whenever financial uncertainties arose, instead of shying away or feeling defeated, I invited myself to stay present and observe without judgment. For example, when an unexpected expense surfaced, I traced its origins instead of jumping to a negative conclusion. I asked what triggered this. How might my reactions be fueling unnecessary drama? This investigative mindset transformed challenges into invitations for clarity rather than sources of dread. I'll never forget a specific evening when a medical bill arrived, significantly larger than anticipated. My first impulse urged panic and despair, but recalling this new approach, I took a moment to brew tea, sit with the discomfort, and write questions. Was this bill correct? Could I negotiate payment arrangements? What resources might I tap? This pause illuminated practical strategies and calmed emotional upheaval. It was as if stepping back allowed me to read a complex map more effectively, charting a course through what had felt like a fog of crisis. Conversely, I noticed that surrendering to automatic reactions led to a different path, one fraught with wasted energy and overlooked possibilities. On certain occasions when anxiety overtook me, I hastily withdrew from communication or made impulsive payments without exploring alternatives. Later reflection revealed these actions drained not only my finances, but also my confidence. This contrast highlighted the transformative potential embedded in mindful engagement. Choosing awareness over autopilot could become a turning point between stagnation and momentum. Sharing this process with close friends opened fresh perspectives as well. In conversations, I heard echoes of similar internal struggles masked as bad luck or just how things go. Together, we began to identify common limiting beliefs and consider how societal narratives about scarcity often infiltrate personal experience. This collective reflection deepened my conviction that evolving our mental framework isn't merely individual work. It's an act of reclaiming power from broader cultural forces that normalize financial suffering. Throughout these shifts, I realized that cultivating patience with myself during setbacks is indispensable. Transformation isn't a straight line, but a winding path with obstacles and breakthroughs. Instead of chastising myself for perceived failures, embracing kindness sustained motivation. Much like tending to a fragile seedling in unpredictable weather, nurturing new attitudes requires consistent attention, grace, and trust in gradual growth. Now, picture yourself engaging in this practice. When a financial tension surfaces, can you pause and become a gentle witness to your internal narrative rather than an impulsive actor? What might unfold if you embrace the role of a compassionate detective, uncovering hidden beliefs shaping your responses? Opening this space creates fertile ground where wiser choices and renewed confidence can take root, reshaping your financial story from within. This internal inquiry, layered with self-compassion and curiosity, stands as a powerful gateway. It reveals that beneath external hardships lies an intricate internal landscape, waiting to be understood and tended. Just as a gardener learns the specific needs of each plant, we learn to recognize and transform the mental soil nourishing our financial behaviors. And in doing so, we open doors to possibilities that once seemed sealed shut. I recall a moment when a sudden invitation to a networking event challenged my usual instincts. Previously, such gatherings stirred a persistent hesitance, a voice whispering that I wasn't ready or that I'd be out of place among more established professionals. This internal hesitation wasn't about shyness alone, but rooted in a deeper narrative, a conviction that I lacked the resources, the credentials, to step confidently into spaces where financial conversations mattered. That night, instead of retreating into familiar insecurity, I chose to examine the underlying script prompting this retreat. The realization struck me that this self-imposed limitation was less reflective of reality and more a cage wrought by my own unexamined beliefs. Walking into the room, I sensed the air humming with possibility far beyond my previous apprehensions. As I navigated conversations, I noticed the subtle shift in my posture, voice, and even breath, small but powerful markers of internal change. There, amidst unfamiliar faces, I accepted invitations to discuss projects, barter ideas, and even explore collaborations that hinted at potential income streams. The energy inside the room, once intimidating, became a landscape of opportunity one had the permission to explore. That night illuminated how the narratives we carry don't just influence inner dialogue, but forge the very boundaries where growth can emerge or stall. On a different occasion, a friend confided in me their chronic avoidance of budgeting, explaining it as an act of self-preservation against feelings of scarcity. Her confession resonated deeply. Budgeting, often portrayed as rigid and unforgiving, can inadvertently become a source of anxiety when it's wielded as a tool of punishment or limitation. I suggested a reframing, treating the budget not as a restrictive cage, but as a compass, a guide steering toward intention and freedom. We began experimenting with colors and visuals, drawing flows of income and expense like rivers and streams on a map. This creative engagement transformed the experience and dismantled layers of resistance, revealing budgeting's potential to empower rather than constrain. This experiment uncovered yet another dimension of consciousness: how engagement with our financial systems can mirror our relationship with creativity and control. Like a painter hesitant to make a brushstroke, many of us hesitate to approach money management with openness for fear of making errors or embracing discomfort. Seeking perfection or fearing failure paralysis initiative. I learned that cultivating a mindset of playful curiosity, allowing room for what if and gentle trial, diffuses the pressure to be flawless. As a result, I experienced a freer connection with my finances, one where learning replaced judgment and progress flourished in imperfect steps. Moreover, during a period when unexpected expenses threatened to overwhelm me, I decided to approach my resources like a gardener tending a patch of soil midwinter, accepting that some growth must pause while preparing the ground for spring's renewal. Instead of obsessing over immediate scarcity, I contrasted my usual urgency with acceptance of this natural ebb. This stance opened an unanticipated path, reaching out to community support networks, swapping skills for temporary aid, and exploring alternative income sources with less stress. The metaphor of seasonal cycles helped me reimagine my financial journey as one marked by rhythms, not relentless push or pull. Simultaneously, I noticed how emotional undercurrents ripple through our financial choices like ocean tides, shaped by currents often invisible at first glance. During a breakfast chat, a colleague recounted how childhood memories of unpredictable finances colored their present-day decisions, specifically, a compulsion to hoard or withhold spending as protection. Listening, I realized that these inherited emotional legacies require mindful unwrapping before they lose their grip. Just as a musician must practice scales to unlock complex melodies, we too must methodically approach these inherited financial emotions to regain autonomy. Acknowledging their presence neither diminishes us nor excuses stagnation. Instead, it equips us with insights necessary to compose new harmonies between desire, need, and abundance. In exploring these themes, I gradually embraced the power of deliberate pauses, a conscious suspension before action. Instead of racing to conclusions, I cultivated a practice of momentary stillness, much like a chess player contemplating a move. This interval allows strategic insight to surface, distinguishing fleeting impulses from grounded intentions. Over time, this cultivated patience reshaped my decisions, enabling choices aligned with long-term vision rather than fleeting relief. I discovered that such mindful interludes act as bridges, connecting raw emotion to reasoned judgment, emergency to strategy, and anxiety to empowerment. Now, picture a moment when upcoming expenses ignite your awareness of vulnerability. Approaching that moment with an open question, how can I align this necessity with my values and vision? Invites clarity. What if instead of reacting immediately to pressure, you stepped back to gather information, seek counsel, or creatively reframe the challenge? In that space, solutions that once seemed hidden begin to reveal themselves, like stars emerging as twilight fades. This shift transforms the nature of financial challenges from burdens to puzzles, inviting insightful engagement. Through these experiences, I came to view financial consciousness not as a fixed destination, but as a living dance, a continuous interplay between inner beliefs, emotional rhythms, and external realities. Embracing this fluidity fosters resilience, adaptability, and a richer connection to the unfolding story we co-create with money. This nuanced relationship, grown through intentional reflection and practice, opens doors not only to greater stability, but also to a deeper sense of freedom and possibility. One evening, a phone call interrupted my quiet, dimly lit room, a chance to discuss a potential side project that promised some extra income. I hesitated, caught between eagerness and the familiar weight of doubt that often clouded my choices. In this pause, I recognized a different internal dialogue creeping to the surface, one less about scarcity and more about possibility. I began to wonder if embracing uncertainty could be less a threat and more an invitation. That night marked a subtle turning point. Instead of dismissing opportunities because they felt risky or uncharted, I started to experiment with curiosity as my compass. My mind unfolded new pathways. What might I learn if I said yes? How could this challenge stretch me? In embracing possibility, I found that fear no longer held absolute sway. This shift resembled stepping onto a bridge whose planks, while untested, promised a new horizon just beyond. One concrete moment stands out. A few weeks later, I faced a choice: accept a lower-paying gig immediately or wait for one that aligned better with my goals. Old habits screamed to grasp what was certain, fearing loss. But this new space allowed me to weigh not just short-term gains, but long-term growth. I reflected on the wider picture, how accepting immediate, lesser opportunities might reinforce limiting cycles. Instead, I chose to wait. That patience paid off when a more fulfilling, better-paying project came through, validating the power of intentional restraint. Alongside embracing possibility, I encountered another vital facet: learning to identify emotional cues rooted not in my current reality but echoes of past hardships. For instance, a strong aversion to spending anything resembling luxury seemed protective on the surface, but, upon reflection, limited experiences that could enhance my life and mindset. I noticed that by denying myself small pleasures, a comforting dinner out, a book I truly wanted, I reinforced an inner narrative that abundance wasn't meant for me. This awareness challenged me. How could I differentiate between prudent restraint and needless deprivation? By tracking my emotional responses closely, I began to perceive when guilt or anxiety surfaced unnecessarily. For example, after treating myself to a modest outing, instead of spiraling into discomfort and remorse, I allowed space to savor the joy and gratitude of that moment. This acted as a subtle but powerful antidote to self-imposed austerity born from old mental chains. Another episode etched into my memory unfolded on a rainy afternoon when I opened an email about a credit card interest rate increase. My initial instinct was to slide into panic and urgency, the familiar maneuver to resolve problems instantly and decisively. Instead, I breathed deeply and paused. I re-examined my spending habits, assessed how this change truly impacted me, and considered alternatives without haste. Through this calm lens, I discovered more flexible options, such as balance transfers with lower interest or adjusting spending categories to minimize impact. This slow, thoughtful approach replaced frenzy with informed strategy. In this period, I realized emotional intelligence applied as much to money management as to any personal interaction. Recognizing my stress signals, sitting with them briefly, and intentionally choosing deliberate responses worked like tuning an instrument before playing a complex symphony. Without this prelude, actions misaligned with true needs and values could cause discord. With it, financial decisions gained harmony. Reflecting more broadly, I found that connecting deeply with my values became a lighthouse guiding choices. When offers or expenditures aligned with personal priorities, like supporting family, pursuing education, or investing in well-being, I felt invigorated and rooted, even if those choices demanded short-term sacrifices. This realization reframed money as a tool, an extension of my principles, not an enemy or puzzle. Decisions took on layers of meaning beyond mere arithmetic, infusing everyday transactions with sense and purpose. Crafting this clarity required deliberate introspection. I began journaling not about budgets or deadlines, but about how spending or saving aligned with who I aspired to be. These moments of slow reflection invited me to unpack fears, hopes, and the stories interwoven with each dollar. One night, writing about a dream to start my own creative venture, I confronted ingrained messages warning of instability and loss. Letting those words flow without censorship enabled me to soften resistance and envision new narratives marked by courage and possibility. As I navigated these emotional landscapes, I noticed how the practice rippled outward. With growing clarity and aligned actions, I engaged differently with the world, more openly, less defensive, and willing to ask for guidance or collaboration. Financial conversations no longer felt daunting, but emerged as opportunities for mutual learning and growth. This transformation was akin to replacing an old, cracked lens with a new, sharpened one, distorting less and revealing more of the rich texture beneath. Now, imagine approaching a decision that in the past triggered reactive impulses. What would change if you paused to explore underlying feelings, questioned habitual fears, and invited a broader perspective? Could this awareness uncover choices synchronized with your authentic self, shifting outcomes beyond mere survival toward flourishing? Such moments, born of deliberate attention and emotional attunement, become the wellsprings of sustainable change and renewed empowerment. There was a moment when I realized the sheer power of curiosity as a tool to unravel the tight grip anxiety held on my approach to resources. Instead of pushing myself to immediately solve every monetary challenge with forceful determination, I shifted toward asking open-ended questions about my fears and habits. One evening, after a frustrating day of crunching numbers with no relief in sight, I sat by the window, watching shadows stretch as dusk settled. I whispered to myself, "What's beneath this fear that's telling me I'll never get ahead?" The vulnerability in that inquiry opened a crack, revealing layers of doubt and stories I hadn't fully acknowledged. It wasn't a neat revelation, but a tangled web of doubts about self-worth, security, and deservingness knitted together over years of experience. Later that week, I experimented with the effect of mapping these internal doubts visually, turning fears into words on a page connected by threads. Presented like a map of mental highways and dead ends, this representation offered a new vantage point. I spotted recurring beliefs, like "I don't deserve abundance," or "if I relax, things will fall apart." Seeing them externalized removed some of their authority. The exercise inspired me to write compassionate counterstatements to each. "I can cultivate abundance through care," or "I am capable of managing challenges with grace." These small self-dialogues became daily refrains, gently diffusing tension that had once felt inescapable. One afternoon, a close friend shared how he sabotaged promising opportunities because of a silent voice warning. "If I succeed, I might lose myself." This struck a chord deeply within me. Our conversations turned toward exploring how identity fears often masquerade as financial blocks. I recalled an incident when I hesitated to request a raise at work, secretly worrying that gaining financial independence would alienate me from family or peers who struggled. Our talk helped unravel this knot. The fear wasn't really about money, but about emotional connection and belonging. I realized that untethering money from identity was essential to move forward, recognizing that financial growth need not threaten my sense of self or relationships. On a rainy evening, when the power flickered unpredictably, I processed through a stack of overdue notices with a calm I hadn't mustered before. Rather than speeding through to meet deadlines like a sprinter chasing a final lap, I approached each bill like a gentle negotiation partner. I voiced requests aloud. "Is there a way to arrange flexible terms here? What support can I access if I communicate openly?" This practice of verbalizing proactive options transformed my usual internal panic into empowered action. It was as if speaking out loud shaped the chaotic thoughts into coherent plans. In this process, I discovered speaking with vulnerability to institutions, often perceived as impersonal forces, could soften their rigidity. I was surprised by the responsiveness and humanity on the other side of these calls. I also noticed how the physical environment influences my mindset around preparation and decision-making. Once, after waking to a cluttered workspace and scattered papers, I struggled to focus on budgeting and planning. The mess mirrored my internal chaos. Taking time to clear, organize, and create a space infused with light made an unanticipated difference. The act of tidying became a ritual of mental decluttering. With a more inviting environment, my thoughts settled more easily, allowing me to approach challenges with steadiness instead of overwhelm. This connection between outer order and inner clarity felt profound, reminding me that shifting the landscape around me could catalyze deeper shifts within. During an early morning walk, observing passing faces lost in their own worlds, I reflected on how financial consciousness requires both personal honesty and a willingness to confront difficult truths without judgment. When I admitted to myself the amount of avoidance I practiced, how often I postponed confronting obligations or brushed off uncomfortable realities, I confronted a paradox. My resistance, though protective in the short run, had long-term costs in stress and lost opportunities. Accepting this gently enabled me to invite proactive habits without spiraling into shame. Instead, I learned to celebrate small steps, opening an envelope, reviewing a statement, or calling a creditor. Each was a brick laid toward rebuilding trust in myself as a financial steward. The idea of interdependence emerged strongly in my reflections, too. Financial well-being isn't a solitary journey. One afternoon, collaborating with a peer on a joint project revealed how shared resources and mutual encouragement can create unexpected momentum. We split responsibilities, took pleasure in shared victories, and supported one another during setbacks. This experience unearthed the richness of accountability partnerships, a network where ambitions don't compete but weave together into collective strength. I began to reconsider isolationist attitudes I'd once carried, recognizing that vulnerability and connection bring resilience that solo effort often lacks. As a chapter in this ongoing exploration, I confronted the sensation of scarcity as not just practical limitation, but deep-seated emotional tension, almost like holding my breath underwater to keep from drowning. Learning to practice mindful breathing in moments of tightness helped me release that tension enough to make clearer assessments. When tightness creeps in during tough choices, taking deliberate, full breaths creates space around those choices, like widening a narrowed tunnel into an open avenue. In that open space, fear diminishes and options reveal themselves. Now, consider how shifting into this mode might feel when encountering an unexpected financial challenge. Instead of bracing for impact, what if you allowed yourself to explore your internal landscape first, inventorying fears, desires, and untold stories, before deciding what to do next? Approaching problems with this subtle attentiveness changes the game. What once felt like an enemy becomes a mystery beckoning understanding, a puzzle awaiting mindful assembly. Gradually, these moments accumulate, and your mindset reorients from reactive juggling into calm navigation, anchored not in control through force, but in graceful adaptation and self-compassion. I sat across from Laura at a small cafe, the hum of quiet conversations swirling around us like invisible currents. She shared her story, a hesitation that gripped her every time she encountered financial decisions. It wasn't the numbers themselves that threw her off, but the tangled emotions hidden beneath. Laura described an urge to either obsessively control every cent or completely avoid handling her finances altogether, as though she were walking a tightrope between paralysis and panic. Listening closely, I recognized a similar dance inside myself. The intriguing part wasn't just the struggle, but the undercurrent of disconnection from deeper intuition. She confessed that the sheer weight of external expectations suffocated any small whisper of instinct. Deadlines, societal pressures, and the voice of comparison blurred the lines between genuine priorities and reactive impulses. Laura's experience illuminated how financial reasoning can get overshadowed by a storm of competing demands, reducing decision-making to a fragmented puzzle. In this fragmented state, genuine insight becomes difficult to grasp. It's as if the mind becomes a puzzle with missing pieces, and the more hurried her attempts were, the more those pieces slid further away. I shared with Laura how I started experimenting with a counterintuitive practice, cultivating a quiet space within my day where I simply listened to my impulses without rushing to judgment or action. At first, this felt like standing at the edge of a vast forest, unsettling, filled with unknowns, but I kept returning. Each session became a gentle invitation to reconnect with silent signals that had been drowned under years of urgency. Over time, I noticed subtle shifts, moments when a calm yes or a thoughtful no emerged without the usual chaos. It was as though a dial was being gently tuned, and decisions began to resonate more authentically. Later that week, while reorganizing my living room, I stumbled upon an old leather-bound journal filled with scribbled reflections from years past. Flipping through, I traced the evolution of my financial mindset, a roadmap of fear, resignation, curiosity, and ultimately acceptance. Among the faded ink, an entry jumped out. If I surrendered control, what new possibilities might arise? At the time, this question felt like a riddle wrapped in vulnerability. Now, it unfolded as an essential beacon guiding me away from rigid fight-or-flight habits towards openness. I understood that the paradox of surrendering control often leads to genuine empowerment. Several days later, I confronted a potentially stressful situation, a sudden repair bill that exceeded my expectations. The instinctive surge of anxiety rose quickly, but this time, I intercepted it. Sitting on my porch in fading sunlight, I practiced embracing the discomfort without rushing to fix it immediately. I remembered how the awareness cultivated in quiet moments allowed me to witness this spike of tension as transient, not permanent. In this space, practical solutions began to take shape naturally. A call to the repair company to negotiate a payment plan, a reallocation of budget lines to ease pressure. The choice to hold steady, instead of reacting with instantaneous action, shifted the entire emotional narrative. This experience underscored the liberating power in accepting uncertainty, not as a failing, but as fertile ground for creativity. I liken it to standing on a rocky shoreline with waves constantly reshaping the sands beneath, knowing that solid footing emerges only when I stop resisting the tide. Our conditioned response often pushes us to seize control at the first sign of disruption, yet embracing the flux reveals hidden avenues for growth. The insights accrued in these intervals of presence illuminated how financial resilience depends as much on embracing vulnerability as on tactical budgeting. Another chapter unfolded in my conversations with Marcus, a former colleague who described a lifelong battle with financial shame that shadowed his accomplishments. For decades, Marcus excelled professionally, yet felt undeserving of monetary rewards, a silent epidemic that eroded his confidence. Together, we explored moments when he equated self-worth with frugality to the point of self-sabotage. His story illuminated how internalized narratives, often unspoken but deeply embedded, shape behaviors more than practicality. A breakthrough came when Marcus began vocalizing gratitude for small wins, monthly savings increments, timely payments, not as a benchmark, but as affirmations of progress. These expressions fostered a healthier relational dynamic with wealth, nurturing pride without guilt. That evening, engaging with Marcus's journey compelled me to reflect on my habitual judgments, how sometimes I equated financial competence with perfection instead of progress. I recalled times when I abandoned plans at the first sign of imperfection, mistaking early setbacks for failure. Allowing space to appreciate incremental steps invited a gentler, more sustainable path forward. I liken this to the slow unfolding of a flower bud. Impatient hands can bruise delicate growth, but tender patience yields blossoming beauty. Now, consider how this perspective unfolds during your own encounters with financial uncertainty or decision-making crossroads. Can you create a holding space, not necessarily physical, but a moment in your internal landscape, where urgency relaxes its grip and deeper wisdom can emerge unhindered? Envision this as a sanctuary amidst a storm, where you hear your internal compass recalibrating, signaling direction beyond immediate reactions. Inviting this consciousness nurtures an ecosystem of trust between your values, emotions, and pragmatic choices, one that opens doors to possibilities invisible in haste. I remember a chilly morning when I found myself hesitating over an unexpected expense that nudged me into unfamiliar territory. A small leak in my apartment's ceiling wasn't urgent enough to demand immediate repair, yet ignoring it promised complications down the road. As I stood by the window, watching gray clouds gather, I realized that the impulse to either fix everything instantly or push it aside stemmed from an inner tension about control and uncertainty. That morning marked the first time I consciously stepped into the discomfort of ambiguity without racing to a quick resolution. The dampness creeping from above became a metaphor for deeper unrest within, a subtle reminder that problems don't always fit neatly into urgent or irrelevant categories, but often linger in a gray area, demanding patient attention. I began experimenting with acknowledging those gray zones as invitations to cultivate what felt like emotional agility. Instead of pushing to resolve every challenge immediately, I learned to balance attentiveness with calm observation, a dynamic that resembled the steady rocking of a boat in a gentle swell. The trick wasn't about suppressing feelings or pushing control aside entirely, but welcoming uncertainty as a natural rhythm in any growth process. When I shifted toward this mindset, I noticed a surprising outcome. Situations I once viewed as crises began to unfold more smoothly, as if my internal steadiness softened the blows rather than resisting them head-on. One afternoon, Lisa, a colleague I respect for her thoughtful approach to money, confided in me about her struggle with all-or-nothing tendencies in her work with clients and personal finances alike. She described oscillating between meticulous budgeting and complete avoidance, a swing that left her feeling depleted. Listening carefully, I recognized a shared human challenge, the trap of extremes that leaves no room for nuance or mercy. Inspired by her honesty, I suggested an experiment, integrating micro-moments of mindful check-ins throughout the day, asking herself, where am I placing my energy now? Is this from alignment or tension? She returned a few days later, surprised by how these tiny pauses helped her reclaim balance and move forward with clearer priorities instead of exhaustion. As I reflected on Lisa's insight, I recalled a similar turning point during a period when I committed to tracking everyday spending without judgment or agenda. Instead of treating the ledger as a battleground, I approached it as a quiet dialogue with myself. Early entries revealed patterns beyond the numbers. The quiet lunches skipped when overwhelmed, the impulsive purchases during moments of boredom, the small acts of generosity that filled emotional voids. Each entry uncovered a layer of vulnerability, inviting me to explore motivations behind actions. This honest exposure, far from provoking shame, sparked compassion and provided a foundation for intentional growth. The process was akin to reading a diary written by a stranger and slowly recognizing yourself in the margins. Months later, I faced an unexpected invitation to join a collaborative project with unpredictable income potential. My instinct tugged me toward cautious skepticism, haunted by memories of past setbacks and fears of instability. Yet, recalling prior lessons inviting curiosity over paralysis, I allowed myself to explore the opportunity through an open mind and heart. Early interactions with the team felt both exciting and intimidating, a dance between hope and hesitation. Gradually, I tuned into feelings beneath surface reactions, sensing when nervousness masked genuine interest or when overconfidence risked bypassing caution. By honoring these subtle cues, I navigated choices with neither reckless abandon nor rigid defense, but with graceful attunement. One striking moment came during a brainstorming session when a bold idea sparked wide-eyed enthusiasm. I found myself debating internally, do I speak up, risking rejection, or stay silent, avoiding potential disappointment? The tension reminded me of years spent shrinking back from risks that now felt less like barriers and more like invitations to courage. Finally, I voiced my thoughts, feeling a surge of empowerment regardless of the outcome. The group's welcoming response affirmed that authentic expression, tuned by self-awareness, opened doors previously sealed by inner fears. As these experiences layered upon one another, a broader understanding took root. True stewardship of resources requires attunement to the spectrum of feelings beneath choices. Now, when I encounter moments of uncertainty or pressure, I strive to treat these emotions as wise messengers, not enemies to be battled or ignored. For example, the flicker of doubt that dances before a purchase no longer triggers blame, but becomes a signal inviting deeper inquiry. What need or boundary lies beneath this hesitation? This subtle shift transforms everyday moments into opportunities for growth and alignment. Now, consider how you might welcome your own feelings as guides in situations where answers aren't clear-cut. Rather than scrambling for immediate certainty, what if you gently leaned into the questions instead? Which patterns emerge when you listen deeply to what your body and mind reveal in those pauses? Cultivating this relationship with inner signals cultivates resilience that bends without breaking, a sturdiness forged in the dance between acceptance and wise action. Like a seasoned sailor reading nuanced wind currents, you learn to navigate complexities with nuanced grace, steering toward horizons shaped by both reality and vision. As I sit with the weight of everything we've unveiled, there's a soft vibration humming beneath the surface, a quiet undercurrent weaving through the fabric of this experience. It's as if all the threads we've touched, The subtle shifts in awareness, the tender acceptance of discomfort, the intentional pauses between impulse and action have been gathering momentum, moving quietly towards something just beyond reach. There's a sensation not unlike standing at the edge of a vast forest at dawn, where the mist conceals what lies ahead, but the promise of discovery pulses in the air. The landscape within feels simultaneously familiar and unfamiliar, shaped by patterns glimpsed but never quite captured, inviting me to journey deeper. Our inner narratives, like intricate tapestries spun over years, grow more vivid now, not through forcing clarity, but as if illuminated by a gentle, expanding light. It becomes apparent that these narratives are less static texts and more living ecosystems, alive with emotion, memory, and possibility, continuously interacting beneath conscious thought. I notice how these internal landscapes shift as I breathe, how certain shadows retreat just enough to reveal hidden pathways, and how tension loosens in silent spaces I didn't know I was creating. It's a delicate dance, not a sudden eruption. Progress is etched in subtle expansion, a widening of the heart's capacity to hold uncertainty without collapse. In this landscape, the act of observing transforms. The observer is no longer a distant critic but an evolving participant, someone willing to hold oneself with grace amid imperfection. It's as though consciousness itself begins to soften the edges of habitual reactions, replacing sharpness with a tempered patience that invites inquiry instead of judgment. This shift reshapes the gravitational field of decision-making. Rather than pulling us into reflexive patterns, it steadies our stance, offering a view from higher ground where choices emerge with nuance and depth, no longer harsh demands but considered invitations. I think about the rhythms that carry us, those unseen currents under daily actions, the habitual cycles we unknowingly dance within. When that rhythm accords with conscious attention, it hums with ease and flow. When discordant, it rattles with friction and noise. Bringing awareness to these subtle movements reveals a portal of transformation, one where fluidity replaces resistance and openness dissolves confinement. It's as if the very structure of our relationship with resources, with ourselves, unknots and rewrites itself in ways both profound and intimate. The imagery of a deep river swirling beneath a placid surface comes to mind, currents moving with purpose and power even when the visible world holds a stillness that belies their strength. Perhaps what we're called to is not a frantic quest to control or conquer, but to attune, to listen carefully to the undercurrents flowing beneath our fears, desires, and habits. This listening becomes an act of courage and tenderness, a sacred negotiation between who we've been and who we are becoming. In surrendering to this process, paradoxically, agency emerges, stronger and more resilient. As you journey alongside me here, I invite you to sense the stirring of your own inner terrain, those quiet urgencies and hesitations, the barely perceptible shifts in breathing or thought that accompany moments of financial reflection and decision. Feel how they pulse with possibility, holding information and invitation in equal measure. The horizon ahead is neither distant nor unreachable, but woven with the realizations that have unfolded within us, silent beacons guiding us gently forward. This unfolding gives rise to a new narrative horizon, painted not with broad strokes of fear or hope alone, but with the intricate hues of self-awareness and intention. The story we trace now is one co-authored by our evolving perceptions and the willingness to meet ourselves fully in every twist and turn. It's a story as dynamic and complex as the dance of light filtering through leaves, ever shifting, ever alive, inviting us to step with fresh eyes into what's next. As I reflect on the journey we've walked together, I find myself drawn not to the obstacles we've encountered, but to a subtle transformation unfolding quietly beneath my awareness. It's as if a veil has been lifted, revealing that the struggle I once viewed as a battle against numbers and deadlines was, in fact, a navigation through my own internal landscape, a terrain marked by stories I hadn't fully heard until now. I remember sitting alone one evening, the soft glow of a lamp casting long shadows across my desk, when the realization broke through the noise. The way I moved through my financial world was deeply entwined with how I moved through life itself. What has become clear is that the essence of change lies less in frantic effort or external conditions, and more in cultivating a presence that invites spaciousness rather than constriction. When my mind is calm, untethered from the pressing urge to fix or control, I discover that options emerge like hidden doorways opening gently, revealing paths I hadn't seen before. It's a tender kind of revelation, one that honors the rhythms of growth, sometimes slow, sometimes halting, reminding me that patience is not passivity, but an active, courageous stance. There was a moment that stayed with me. I was faced with a choice that carried familiar echoes of my old patterns. The impulse was to lunge forward, seeking immediate relief, clutching at certainty like a lifeline. Yet, instead of acting out of urgency, I chose to linger in the question itself. In that deliberate pause, I wasn't paralyzed. I was attentive, listening for voices long buried beneath layers of anxiety and learned resistance. I heard whispers of hope, tenderness, and possibility. This subtle shift changed the nature of the moment. What had once spurred hurried reaction now invited thoughtful engagement, allowing me to gather strength and clarity that propelled me forward more confidently. In those quiet encounters with myself, I felt a profound reconnection, not just with my capacity to handle financial complexities, but with a deeper sense of trust in my own wisdom. This trust emerged not from external validation or flawless execution, but from embracing my imperfections as part of the unfolding story. I began to see how self-compassion could be the steady anchor amidst uncertainty, softening the harsh edges of fear that once dictated my choices. Each time I extended kindness inward, a ripple effect took hold, transforming doubts into invitations and obstacles into lessons. I can't help but imagine what might unfold if we all approached our challenges, not only financial, but in every corner of our lives, with this openness. What would it look like to meet uncertainty not as an adversary, but as a teacher guiding us toward untapped reserves of courage? How might our days shift if we replaced relentless striving with gentle curiosity, recognizing that true power flows from aligning action with clarity of heart? This transformation isn't a destination, but a continuous unfolding, a living dialogue between who we have been and who we are learning to become. There will be moments of setback, shadows that creep back to test this newfound awareness. Yet within that tension lies fertile ground for growth, an invitation to return again and again to the sanctuary of presence. I've learned the importance of honoring this cyclical nature, not chasing a final victory, but dancing with the ebb and flow, each step revealing new layers of resilience. So, as I breathe into this moment, I offer a quiet encouragement. Lean in gently toward your experience, honoring the complexity that makes you human. Trust that the shifts within you carry seeds of possibility far beyond what immediate circumstances might show. Know that the space you carve for stillness, for reflection, is not empty. It is charged with the creative energy that fosters renewal. In this space, your story unfolds with greater depth, unfolding not through force, but through tender, deliberate awakening. Our journey continues, unfolding in the moments we dare to pause and listen deeply to ourselves. I invite you to hold this awareness close as you step forward, not chasing quick answers, but embracing the rich, unfolding dance of conscious living, where each breath, each thought, each choice becomes a brushstroke painting a vibrant canvas of hope and transformation.